Look at that watermelon in your hands. You're standing in the store, tapping it, listening, hoping, and you have no real idea if it's sweet. It could be pink mush and disappointment. Here's the truth nobody taught you. There is one mark on the rind that tells you almost everything. A rough, brown, scarred patch. Most people put that melon back on the shelf. They think it's damage. They think it's a flaw. It is actually the single best sign of a sugar-loaded melon on the whole table. The Amish families I sat with never once thumped a melon. They read it. They looked at 3 things the rest of us were never taught to see. By the end of this, you will pick the sweetest melon in the bin every single time, even in the dead of winter. The first time I watched an old grower near Bird in Hand choose one, he never knocked on it, not once. Stay with me. Near the end, I'll show you a marking tied to a laboratory in Charleston, South Carolina from 1954, a discovery that quietly changed how this entire country grows the fruit. And this works whether you grow your own or you have never planted a single seed in your life. Let me tell you how I got here, because I was the worst offender in the store. For about 40 years, I did exactly what my father did and what his father did before him. I picked up the melon, I knocked on it with my knuckles like I was rapping on a neighbor's door, and I listened for that hollow sound everybody swears by. Then I carried it home, proud of myself, set it on the counter, and cut into it. And half the time it was pale, watery, grainy in the middle, sweet as a garden hose. I probably wasted a small fortune on bad melons over the years, and I never once questioned the method, because it was the only method anybody ever gave me. Here is what changed everything. A few summers back, I was spending time out in Amish country, first in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and later out in Holmes County, Ohio, and I stopped at one of those roadside produce stands you see with the hand-painted sign and the honor box for your money. There was an older man there, suspenders, straw hat, hands like leather, and a wagon bed full of melons still warm from the field. I watched him help a customer. And what he did, or rather what he did not do, stopped me cold. He never tapped a single melon. He turned each one over. He looked at the belly. He ran his thumb across the skin. He studied a curly little dried up thread near the stem. And then he handed the woman a melon and said, plain as day, that one will be the sweetest of the bunch. She looked skeptical. I was skeptical too, but I bought one he picked for me, drove it home, and cut into the reddest, crispest, sweetest watermelon I had eaten in probably 30 years. So I did what any stubborn man does. I went back and I asked him to teach me. And what he told me was so simple and so completely opposite of everything I thought I knew that I felt a little cheated. Because none of this is secret in the sense of being hidden in a vault. It is secret because it was never passed to us. We got handed the one trick that barely works, the thump, and we lost all the ones that actually do. So let's start with that thump, because I know it's the first thing your hand wants to do. You pick up a melon and your knuckles go to it automatically. I get it. And I'm not going to tell you it's completely worthless. There is a small kernel of truth buried in it. When you wrap a green, immature melon, the flesh inside is dense and tight, and it gives you a high, tight, almost metallic ring. When you knock on a melon that's genuinely ripe, the flesh has loosened, it's full of juice and sugar, and it gives back a lower, hollow, deeper sound, more like a drum than a ping. That much is real. Researchers at Iowa State University's Extension Office put it about as plainly as it can be put. An immature melon wrapped with your knuckles gives off a metallic ring. A ripe one gives off a hollow or dull ring. But, and this is the part that stings, those same researchers came right out and said that thumping or tapping the melon is generally not a good indicator of ripeness. Read that again. The one method almost every American relies on, the extension scientists themselves call unreliable. And here's why. That sound depends on the thickness of the rind, the variety of the melon, the temperature of the fruit, and even how much you've been handling it. A thick-rinded melon sounds dull whether it's ripe or not. A cold melon out of a refrigerated case sounds different than a warm one off a truck. Your ear is guessing, and you're betting $5 and your family's dessert on a guess. The Amish grower didn't thump because he didn't need to. He had better information written right on the outside of the fruit, and once you learn to read it, you'll never go back to knocking either. Therefore, let's move to the first mark he actually trusted, and it's the one I want you to burn into your memory. Turn the melon over. On the bottom, on the belly, there is a pale patch, where the melon sat on the ground while it grew. Growers call it the field spot or the ground spot. Most shoppers never even look at it. They keep the melon upright the whole time, like they're afraid to turn it over, but that spot is a calendar. It tells you exactly how long that melon ripened on the vine before somebody cut it. Here's how you read it. If that field spot is white, or pale green, or barely there at all, put the melon down and walk away. A white belly means that melon was picked too early before it had time to develop its sugar, and it will taste flat no matter what you do to it. What you want, what the old man reached for every single time, is a field spot that is a deep, creamy, buttery yellow. The darker and more golden that patch, the longer that melon sat in the sun soaking up sugar before it was harvested. A rich yellow, sometimes even edging toward light orange, is the mark of a melon that was allowed to fully ripen where it grew. The kitchen scientists and the extension folks agree on this one completely. Iowa State describes it as the belly turning from a greenish white to a buttery yellow or cream when the melon is ready, and they note it shows up most clearly on the dark green skinned varieties, the ones with that deep rind you see stacked in every store. Now think about what that means for the way melons get sold to you. A melon on a supermarket shelf was picked days, sometimes a week or more, before it ever reached your hand, because it has to survive a truck ride across the country. A lot of them get harvested a hair early on purpose, so they don't turn to mush in transit. That's the melon with the white belly. That's the one designed for the shelf, not for your tongue. The creamy yellow belly is the melon that was allowed to be a real vine-ripened piece of fruit. Suddenly you're not guessing anymore. You're reading the history of the melon right off its own skin. And you can do it in the store in 3 seconds without making a sound. Now, let me put a number on all of this, because I'm a numbers man and I suspect you are too. And once you hear this figure, you'll never look at a melon the same way again. Growers and packers measure the sweetness of a melon on something called the sugar scale, the brick scale, and it's just the percentage of sugar in the juice. Here's the line that matters. A watermelon that measures below about 10 on that scale is considered flat, second rate, not worth selling, and most serious growers won't put their name on it. A genuinely good melon lands around 11, and the truly special ones, the kind that old Amish grower handed me off his wagon, push up past 12. That's the whole game right there. The difference between the melon that disappoints you and the melon your grandkids remember is only 2 or 3 points of sugar. And every single sign I'm teaching you, the belly, the shine, the tendril, the scars, is just a free way to read that sugar number off the outside of the fruit without ever cutting it open. The growers use a little glass gadget called a refractometer to measure it in a drop of juice. You've got something better. You've got the eyes, the Amish trained, and they don't cost a thing. Now pick that melon up and feel its weight, because this is another one the old man leaned on. 2 melons the same size should not weigh the same if one is ripe and one isn't. A ripe watermelon is more than 90% water by weight, packed dense with juice and sugar, so a good one feels surprisingly heavy in your hands, heavier than your eyes expect. Lift 2 melons of the same size, one in each hand, and buy the one that feels like it's hiding a brick inside. The light one is airy, drier, further from that sugar peak. It's such a simple test, and I watched that grower do it without even thinking, weighing melons in his palms like a man weighing coins. But the field spot and the weight only tell you part of the story, and this is where the tension starts to build, because the Amish grower looked at something else that most people, even a lot of gardeners, have never heard a word about in their lives. And once he pointed it out to me, I started seeing it on melons everywhere, and I could not believe I'd walked past it for 50 years. He ran his thumb across the top of the melon and he felt for the shine. A young, underripe watermelon has a slick, glossy, almost waxy skin, shiny like a new car. As the melon ripens on the vine, that shine dulls down. It goes matte. It develops a slightly rough, dusty, duller finish. The extension research backs this up word for word, that the fruit tends to lose its slick appearance on top and becomes dull when it's ripe. So a bright, glossy, mirror shiny melon is telling you it's young. A duller, flatter looking rind that doesn't reflect the store lights back at you is telling you it had time to mature. It's a small thing, But stack it on top of the yellow belly and you've now got two independent signs pointing the same direction, and your odds have gone way up. Therefore, let's talk about the little dried thread that made me feel like I'd been walking around blindfolded. Near where the stem connects to the melon, if you're lucky enough to find a melon with it still attached, there is a small, curly tendril. The old-timers call it the pig's tail. When the melon is still growing and drinking from the vine, that tendril is green, soft, and curly, alive and pulling in energy. When the melon reaches full ripeness, the vine cuts off the supply, and that little tendril dries up and turns brown and brittle. The Iowa State Extension says it right out, that the browning of that pig's tail, the light green curly tendril attached to the vine near the melon, is a genuine ripeness sign, and in some varieties it browns a full 7 to 10 days before the melon peaks. Now here's what the Amish grower taught me about that tendril that no chart will tell you. He said a brown pig's tail means the melon was ripe on the vine the way nature intended and cut at the right moment, not yanked early to make a shipping schedule. A green tendril, or a stem that's still green and fresh, means somebody pulled that melon before it was done. So when you're at a farm stand or a good market and you see melons with the stem still on, you now have a secret grade card in your hand. Dried, brown, curled stem and tendril, that's your melon. Green, fresh, moist stem, leave it for the fella who still thinks the thump is magic. And I want to stop right here, because this is the exact point where something shifted for me, and I think it'll shift for you too. I realized that none of this was folklore. None of it was a grandma's superstition. Every single one of these signs is written up in university extension research, confirmed by scientists, and it was all just sitting there in plain sight while the rest of us bought disappointment by the armful. The knowledge existed. It was studied and proven. It just never made the jump from the research station and the Amish wagon into the hands of ordinary people at the grocery store. Somebody somewhere decided the thump was good enough for us. It wasn't. Now, let me be honest with you about who I am and what I've been collecting, because this melon is really just one drawer in a much bigger cabinet. Everything I learned in those communities, the way they keep a cellar cold without a compressor, the way they store a whole season's food without a chest freezer humming on your electric bill, the way they keep pests out of a pantry with things already in the kitchen, I put all of it together, room by room, into something called the Complete Amish Home System, and it's the rest of this same buried archive you're getting a single taste of right now. There's a special limited time offer on it as of this recording, and I've left it linked down in the description with a QR code right there on your screen you can scan. I'm not going to hammer on it because I want to get back to the melon, and honestly, the next part is where this whole thing finally pays off. Because so far I've given you the signs that tell you a melon is ripe. Ripe and sweet are not the same thing. And this is where the real separation happens between a decent melon and one that makes your grandkids' eyes go wide at the picnic table. Let me set this up with a paradox that took me a while to swallow. Two melons can be sitting side by side. Both have the creamy yellow belly, both have the dull skin, both were vine ripened, and one of them will taste noticeably sweeter than the other. Why? What's the tiebreaker? The Amish grower knew, and the answer goes back to something that happened weeks before that melon was ever picked, back when it was just a yellow flower in the field being visited by bees. Here's the science, and it's genuinely one of the most surprising things I learned in this whole business. A watermelon flower doesn't get pollinated in one clean visit. To set a full, well-formed sweet melon, that female flower has to be visited many times by bees, over and over, each visit delivering more grains of pollen. The more complete that pollination, the more seeds set inside, and the more seeds that set, the more sugar the plant pumps into that fruit, and the more even and symmetrical it grows. Pollination isn't just about making a melon, it's about how sweet and how well-shaped the melon turns out. A poorly pollinated flower gives you a lopsided, hollow-hearted, watery melon. A heavily pollinated flower gives you a heavy, symmetrical, sugar-packed one. Let me make that concrete, because it's easy to say and hard to picture. A single watermelon flower has to receive somewhere on the order of 500 to 1,000 grains of pollen, spread evenly all the way around, to set a full, round, sugar-rich melon. No bee carries that much in one trip. It takes a whole string of visits, one bee after another, each one dusting a few more grains onto that flower over the couple of days it's open. If the bees come often and work it thoroughly, the fruit fills out evenly, packs in its seeds, and floods itself with sugar. If the bees are scarce, or the weather's bad, or the flower only gets worked once or twice, you get that lopsided melon with the hollow, cracked, pale center everybody hates, the one that's watery on one end and mealy on the other. That hollow heart, that off-center shape, that isn't bad luck. That's a flower that didn't get enough bee traffic. And with honeybees under so much pressure in this country, well-pollinated melons are actually getting harder to come by, which makes knowing how to spot one worth even more than it used to be. So, how on earth are you supposed to see in the store how many times a bee landed on a flower 2 months ago? You'd think it'd be impossible. It is not. And this is the secret finale I promised you at the very beginning. This is the mark that the old grower reached for last, the one he trusted more than all the rest combined, and it is the one almost every shopper in America actively avoids. It's called webbing. Some of the old growers call them sugar spots. On the rind of certain melons, you'll see rough, corky, pale brown lines, like scars or scratches, sometimes spread out in a web or a net pattern, sometimes clustered in a rough brown patch. To the untrained eye, they look like damage. They look like a bruise, a scrape, maybe the start of rot. So people take one look and set that melon down and reach for the smooth, flawless, pretty one instead. And they are choosing the weaker melon every single time. Because here is what that webbing actually is. Those brown, scarred, corky lines are the healed over marks left on the young fruit's skin from exactly where the bees landed and worked the flower during pollination. More bee contact, more pollination, more sugar. The webbing is a literal, physical fingerprint of how many times that flower got visited. The food scientists have caught up to what the growers knew all along. As the folks at Tasting Table laid it out, webbing often indicates that the flower was heavily pollinated, which means the resulting melon will be both larger and sweeter inside. The scars you were taught to avoid are the single most reliable outward sign of a heavily pollinated, sugar-loaded, vine-ripened melon on the whole table. Sit with that for a second, because it flips the entire produce aisle upside down. Everything about the way melons are displayed, everything about the way we've been trained to shop, pushes you toward the smooth, unblemished, cosmetically perfect fruit, and that instinct is dead wrong. The prettiest melon in the bin is very often the blandest. The ugly one, the one with the brown web of scars across its shoulder that everybody else rejected, that's the candy. The Amish never cared what the melon looked like on a store shelf, because they were never selling to a shelf. They were growing to eat, so they learned to love the marks the rest of us were trained to fear. Now let me tie the history into this, because this is the part that turns a shopping tip into something that feels like recovered knowledge. Down in Charleston, South Carolina, there is a United States Department of Agriculture research station, the U.S. Vegetable Laboratory. And back in 1954, a scientist there named Charles Frederick Andrus released a watermelon he'd spent years developing called the Charleston Gray. It was built to resist the diseases that were wiping out watermelon crops, to yield heavily across the whole country, and to survive long-distance shipping without bruising. The very next year, in 1955, the USDA gave him its Superior Service Award for it. That single variety became the genetic backbone of a huge share of the melons grown in America, and its blood runs in the striped melons you see stacked in your store today. And here's the quiet irony buried in that history. That melon was engineered, in part, to travel, to ship, to survive the truck, which means it was optimized for the very system that trains growers to pick early, before the field spot goes gold, before the sugar peaks, so the fruit arrives intact instead of arriving perfect. The whole industrial pipeline, from the shipping-friendly breeding to the early harvest to the smooth melon displays, was built around what's convenient to sell, not what's sweetest to eat. That's not a conspiracy with a villain twirling a mustache. It's something quieter and, honestly, more frustrating. A whole country slowly forgot how to read a melon because the people selling them had every reason to sell you on the thump and no reason at all to teach you the webbing. I remember standing in a field out in Holmes County, Ohio, late one afternoon with the light going gold, watching a family bring in melons on a flatbed wagon pulled by 2 big draft horses. There were no gauges, no meters, no clipboards. A boy no older than 12 was walking the rows ahead of the wagon, and he'd crouch down, turn a melon, glance at the tail on the vine, thump it once out of habit maybe, and either leave it or twist it free. His grandfather had taught him, and his grandfather had been taught. And somewhere back up that line was a great-great-grandfather who learned it before there was a single supermarket in America to lie to him about it. That boy could outpick any produce manager in the country, and he'd probably never once thought of it as special. To him, it was as ordinary as tying his shoes. That's the thing about this kind of knowledge. It doesn't feel rare to the people who still have it. It only feels rare to the rest of us who lost it and who had to drive out into the countryside to find somebody who never let it go. And here's what got under my skin on the drive home that night. Those families weren't hoarding a secret. They'd have told anybody who asked. The problem was that almost nobody ever asks anymore. We stopped growing our own food, we stopped talking to the people who do, and we handed the whole job of choosing what we eat over to a store that gets paid whether the melon is sweet or not. The store has no reason on earth to teach you the webbing, because the store makes the same money selling you the flat melon as the sweet one. Actually, the store would rather sell you the pretty, flawless, early-picked melon because it lasts longer on the shelf and it doesn't scare you off with a bunch of brown scars. Every incentive in that building points away from your tongue and toward their shelf life. Nobody sat in a room and plotted against you. It just added up one convenient decision at a time, until a whole nation of grown adults stood in produce aisles knocking on fruit like it was a front door, hoping somebody sweet was home. Now, if you don't grow a single thing, if you've never planted a seed, and every melon you'll ever eat comes out of a grocery store bin under fluorescent lights, stay with me. Because this next part is specifically for you. You do not need a garden to use any of this. You do not need land, or a farm stand, or an Amish neighbor. You need 30 seconds and your own 2 eyes. Next time you're at the store, do exactly what that old man in the straw hat did. First, flip the melon over and hunt for the creamiest, most buttery yellow field spot you can find, and reject anything with a white or pale green belly. Second, run your palm across the top and pick the one with the duller, less shiny skin. Third, and most important, stop reaching for the flawless melon and start hunting for webbing, those rough brown sugar spot scars, and grab the one that has the most of it. Fourth, pick it up. A ripe melon should feel heavy for its size because it's dense with water and sugar, not light and airy. And finally, look at the overall shape. You want a melon that's even and symmetrical all the way around, because a lopsided melon got pollinated unevenly and ripened unevenly, and it'll have sweet spots and watery spots in the same fruit. Do those 5 things, and I promise you, you will outpick every other person in that store, and you'll do it for the same money you were already spending. There's no gadget to buy, there's no app, there's no upgrade, it's just the knowledge handed back to you the way it should have been handed to you decades ago. And think about what that adds up to over a lifetime. If your family eats a melon a week through the summer, that's 15 or 20 melons a year, and if half of them used to be a gamble, you were throwing real money and real dinners in the trash season after season for decades. Fix the picking, and you fix all of it forever, starting this weekend. And let me clear up one old wives' tale while we're here, because somebody always brings it up. You may have heard that melons come in boys and girls, that a tall, oblong melon is a male, and a round, squat one is a female, and that one is sweeter than the other. It's a charming story. It is not true. A watermelon is a single fruit, it doesn't have a sex you can read from its shape, and the round versus oblong difference is mostly just the variety and how it grew. Don't waste your energy on it. The field spot, the webbing, the dull skin, and the weight, those are real. The boy-girl business is just noise that got passed around because it sounded clever. I chased it for years, skip it. Now, let me give you a couple of bonus pieces that the Amish knew and that most guides leave out entirely, because we're not done squeezing every drop of value out of this. The first is about when to buy and how the season works. A watermelon does not ripen any further once it's cut from the vine. Unlike a peach or a banana that keeps softening on your counter, a watermelon is as sweet as it will ever be the moment it's harvested, and it slowly goes downhill from there. This is exactly why that field spot and that webbing matter so much, because you can't fix a bad melon at home, you can only pick a good one at the start. It's also why melons picked at the true peak of the local summer season from a grower who isn't shipping them 1,000 miles are almost always sweeter than the ones trucked in during the shoulder seasons. If you've got a farm stand or a farmer's market near you, and you can buy a melon that was on the vine yesterday, you are starting with a better piece of fruit than any supermarket can offer, and now you know exactly how to pick the best one on the wagon. The second bonus is about storing it once you get it home, and this one surprises people. There's a strong instinct to shove that whole melon straight into the refrigerator. Resist it, at least for a while. A whole, uncut watermelon is actually best kept at cool room temperature until you're ready to cut it, and research on watermelon has found that melons held at room temperature can hold on to more of their beneficial compounds and eating quality than ones that get chilled down cold too early. Keep the whole melon out on the counter or in a cool pantry, cut it the day you want to eat it, and then refrigerate whatever's left in a sealed container. You'll get a sweeter, richer bite than if you'd stored it ice cold from day one. That's a little bit of Amish patience right there, the kind of patience that lets a thing be what it's supposed to be instead of rushing it. And here's the deeper thing the Amish taught me about the growing side, for those of you who do have a garden or are thinking about one. Their sweetest melons often came from a patch where, in the last week or two before harvest, they eased way off the water. It sounds backwards. You'd think more water means a juicier melon, but a plant that's given endless water just dilutes the sugar it's making, and the melon gets big and bland. A plant that gets a little thirsty in that final stretch concentrates its sugars, and the fruit comes out smaller but far, far sweeter. It's the same reason a tomato from a dry-farmed field tastes more intense than one pumped full of irrigation. Stress, in the right dose and at the right time, is what builds flavor. The old-timers knew that in their bones long before any laboratory measured it, and if you grow your own, backing off the hose in that last stretch is the single biggest thing you can do to raise the sugar in your own melons. So let's put the whole picture back together, because you now know more about choosing a watermelon than 99 out of 100 people standing in that produce aisle. You know, the thump you were raised on is the least reliable trick in the book. You know, to flip the melon and read the field spot, gold and creamy for sweet, white and pale for a reject. You know to feel for the dull skin instead of the shine. You know to look for the brown, dried pig's tail on the stem. You know, the ugly brown webbing isn't damage at all. It's the fingerprint of the bees, the surest sign of a heavily pollinated, sugar-loaded melon on the table. You know, to lift it and feel that it's heavy for its size, and to choose the even, symmetrical shape. And you know, it all traces back to real science, real growers, and a research station in Charleston, South Carolina, that helped build the very fruit sitting in your cart, even as the system around it slowly let us forget how to read it. Here's what I really want you to take from all of this, and it's bigger than a watermelon. For most of my life, I paid for things I didn't need to pay for, and I settled for less than I could have had, simply because nobody ever handed me the knowledge that would have set me free. And it wasn't lost knowledge. It wasn't secret in any real sense. It was proven, written down, and kept alive by people who never stopped doing things the honest way. It just never reached me. When you pick that perfect melon this weekend, and your family goes quiet at the first bite because it's that good, I want you to feel what I felt, which is that you took back something that was quietly taken from you. If you're the kind of person who believes that real, practical knowledge has been pushed aside and forgotten while the rest of us just paid and settled, then you already know what to do next. Here's my one question for you, and I read every answer, so don't just think it. Type it out and leave it in the comments below. What method were you raised on? The thump, the boy-girl shape, something your grandmother swore by, and are you going to trust the webbing this weekend instead? Tell me. I want to know what you were taught, and I want to know how that first webbed melon turns out when you cut into it this weekend. And if this opened your eyes even a little, subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are pulling this old, honest knowledge back out of the dark, one forgotten skill at a time. Because next time, I'm going to show you the Amish way of keeping a root cellar cold and food fresh for months with no electricity, no compressor, and no monthly bill. And there's one detail about how they position the cellar door that took me completely by surprise. Turn that melon over, read the belly, trust the scars, and I'll see you on the next one.